In our previous videos, we've been looking at how much an individual is willing and able to buy. So we've derived the demand curve in a number of ways. We use indifference curves, we used utility maximization. We simply asked people how much they were willing and able to buy and added up the quantities at each price to get the market demand curve. So once we have the demand curve, it represents how much you're willing and able to buy. The question is, how much do you actually buy? Well, in order to determine the amount you actually buy, we also need to consider the price in the market. So here we have a demand curve, okay? And then we need to recognize that when you go to the store, there may be a difference between what you're willing and able to pay, right? Those are these points on the demand curve. They represent the amount you're willing and able to buy. But you also have to consider what is the price of the item on the shelf. So what I look at now is what is called consumer surplus. The difference between what you're willing and able to pay, okay, so what is the price that you're willing to pay? What is the actual price? So we're looking at the difference between the between the price on the demand curve at a specific quantity and the price at the store. So this difference here between the price you'd be willing to pay and the price you have to pay, that's the deal you're getting. That's the consumer surplus. So as individuals, we want to maximize the consumer surplus. We like a deal, right? Don't you love when things are on sale? You like when things are on sale because there's a difference between the price you have to pay and what you were willing to pay. So you feel like you're getting a deal. Well, in economics, we call that consumer surplus, the difference between what you're willing to pay and what you actually pay. We can use this to help us determine how much, what quantity you're willing to buy based on a particular market price. So we need to look at maximizing our consumer surplus. We stop buying when we're no longer getting a deal. If the price you have to pay is more than the value to you, you're not going to get it. So we can use this to determine how much we're going to buy because we are maximizing our consumer surplus, our deal. And we can actually value that deal that we're getting. So let's walk through an example. Let's suppose that you still go and buy movies at Best Buy. I know, life has changed, you stream them. You pay one price, you get lots. Well, what if we're going to Best Buy and we're buying a movie? Okay, so we go into Best Buy and we're looking for a good movie to watch. And the price on the shelf, okay, because movies are discounted now because you can get them streaming. The price of the movie is $10. All right. Well, you go to buy that first video. You're looking for entertainment, and we know that the marginal utility, the extra happiness, if we don't have something, that first one is really valuable to us. So that extra happiness, that marginal utility is high. So we're probably willing to pay more for the first item than we are for subsequent items. So according to this demand curve, when we go from having 0 items to 1, the amount we're willing to pay for that first item, if we go up here, and I'm going to clear this off since, got to push the right button, clear this off a bit because I don't have these lined up properly. But let's draw our line here. So according to our graph, when we get that first movie, it's worth $22.50 to us. But if the price at Best Buy is $10, then there's quite a deal to be had because we were willing to pay $22.50, but the price is only $10. So how much consumer surplus or how much of a deal are we getting? Well, $12.50 of a deal because we were willing to pay $22.50. We only had to pay $10. All right, you're trying to decide, should you get a second movie? Well, having more movies, the extra movies aren't as extra valuable to you. That marginal utility is going to be less because you already have the first one, which really satiated you, fulfilled that need to find something to watch, and now the extra is just bonus. So the marginal utility is less, which means that the price that you're willing to pay for a second is probably not the same, it's lower. According to this demand curve, you're willing to pay $20 for that second movie. Well, all the movies are labeled as $10, so are you getting a deal? Yes, we're getting a deal of how much? Well, we were willing to pay $20, we only have to pay $10, so the deal we're getting is $10. Do you buy a third? Well, when we look at the third, that third movie, again, we already have one and then we have a second, so the extra happiness, the marginal utility that we're getting from having that third movie is not as much as the previous. So the amount we're willing to pay to buy the third movie is not as much as movie 1 and 2. So here, we're willing to pay, here's where a straight edge comes in handy. Got to be able to keep your line straight if you're building it from a demand curve graph. The amount that we are willing to pay for the third movie is 15, and the price that we're paying is 10. So are we getting a deal? Yes, and that deal is $5. So we're still paying less than the value to us. We're still getting consumer surplus. We're still happy because we're getting more value than we're having to pay. So let's go and look at the fourth one. When we look at that fourth movie, again, we already have 1, 2, and 3, so the marginal utility, the extra happiness is less. So we're not willing to pay as much for movie number 4, and according to our demand curve, we're willing to pay about $12.50. It costs $10, so are we getting a deal? Yes, $2.50 of a deal. Now we go and look at buying that fifth movie. Well, again, we now have lots of movies. So the extra happiness is not as much, still makes us happy. The price we're willing to pay here is $10. The price at the store is $10. Do you get it? Yeah, because it's worth what you're paying. Are you getting any consumer surplus? Are you getting a deal? This time we have no deal. Okay, we're not getting any extra value more than we're paying. But yes, we would get that movie. Well, what about the sixth movie? The sixth movie, okay, is worth what, $7.50 to us. And the price at the store is $10. So if it's worth $7.50, but you have to pay $10, will you get it? No, it's not worth that much to you. So where do we stop in terms of our purchases? We will get 5 movies. We've maximized all the consumer surplus. We've gotten all the deals we could have. We stopped when we're paying the same value. So the value is the same as the price. So how much total consumer surplus do we get? Well, we add up all the deals to be had, our $12.50, our $10, our $5, our $2.50, and our 0, and the total consumer surplus is $30. Now, what if we were looking at a product that could be sold in partial units? So here you can't buy half a DVD, okay? But what if we were selling bags of nails and we sold it by weight? Then you could sell or buy half a kilo, a sixth of a kilo, right? So we could buy different weights. In that case, we don't want to consider just the deals that are had here at the whole numbers. We want to consider the deals that can be had at all the combinations in between. So to measure the consumer surplus, in that case, we need to be able to find the area of a triangle. So do you remember how to find the area of a triangle? Well, we take the base times the height. Okay, that would give us the area of a square. And since a triangle is half of that, we do base times height divided by 2. So in this case, we can see that our triangle goes from 0 to 5. That's our base. Our height goes from 10 to 25. So we're going to multiply that times the height of 25 minus 10, or 15. And we're going to divide that by 2. So we're doing 5. 25 minus 10 is 15. And we divide all that by 2. So then to find the consumer surplus, we would do that calculation. And what we get is $37.50. So notice the consumer surplus here is more than the consumer surplus before. Why? Well, that's because when we include all the deals that are in between, there's extra deals to be had, and we're gaining an extra value of $7.50 for all those deals in between. So the total deal we're getting is $37.50. That is the extra value to us beyond the price that we paid for it. So we want to maximize the consumer surplus. When we go and we purchase something, we want to maximize the deal to us. In later videos, we'll look at producer surplus because businesses also want to maximize the deal for them by looking at the difference between the cost and what they sell it for. Here, consumer surplus looks at the difference between what the customer is willing to pay and what they actually pay. When you go and we exchange money for goods, so when we buy things, sell things in the market, we are all maximizing our consumer and producer surplus. And ultimately, that's what's going to determine the price we pay and the quantity that is sold. Before we leave this topic, though, let's look at what happens if we purchase in batches. So here, let's suppose that there's a company that sells software to other companies. Okay, so we're selling tax software. So we're selling it in batches, not just one CD, one CD. Who's got a CD anymore? I need to update these examples. Technology changed too much. So we need to look at, okay, what if we don't sell just one disc at a time? What if we're selling them in bundles? How does that change the consumer surplus? Well, here we have to recognize that we're getting a deal for every one of the units we're purchasing. So if we buy the first batch of 10,000, we would have paid $30 per unit, but only had to pay $20 per unit. Then there's a deal to be had for every one of those items. So we would have paid 30, we only had to pay 20. The deal we were getting was 10, but we're getting that for all 10,000. So the consumer surplus here is actually 10 times 10,000 or 100,000. So we would have paid 100, we were willing to pay 100,000 more than we actually paid. So we saved ourselves $100,000. Well, what about when we go from 10,001 units to 20,000 units? Here we're getting additional 10,000 units. That second 10,000 isn't worth as much to us, okay, because we already have 10,000. So we would have paid 28. We only have to pay 20. We're getting a deal of 8 for every unit, and that's an extra 10,000 units. So then the deal we're getting, our consumer surplus, is 80,000. So we could keep working through this example for the next 10,000, right? If we would have paid 26, we only had to pay 20. We're getting a deal of 6. But we have to recognize that we're getting that deal for the next batch of 10,000. When we go from 30,001 to 40,000, that's a deal of $4 because we would have paid 24. We only had to pay 20, and we're getting that for the next 10,000 units. So take a moment and figure out the total consumer surplus. How many units are we going to get? And how much is the difference between what we're willing to pay and what we actually pay? So how much of a deal are we getting? Well, we can see right away from the graph that at 70,000 units, the value to us is less than the price in the market. So we wouldn't buy that many. We stop when the amount we pay is equal to the amount we are willing to buy, when the extra value to us is equal to the extra cost to us. Marginal benefit, marginal cost. So here we can see we'd end up with 60,000 units. What's the total deal we're getting? Well, we take that 100,000 plus 80,000 plus 60,000 plus 40,000, and we keep going. We end up with consumer surplus of 300,000. Noticing that the last 10,000, we're paying what it's worth to us. Again, with this example, instead of just looking at batches of 10,000, we could instead look at all possible combinations. So we could buy 10,713 units. We could buy 15,400 units, right? Each of those has deals because there's a difference between what we'd be willing to pay and what we actually pay. So if we want to include all of those deals to calculate our consumer surplus, then again, we are looking for the area of the triangle. So what was the formula for the area of the triangle? 1/2 base times height. So here the base goes from 0 to 60,000. The height goes from 20 to 32. So we go all the way from here to here, and then we divide that by 2. So we have 12 times 60,000 divided by 2. We get 360,000. Again, notice that this 360,000 is more than the 300,000, and that's the extra savings that we're getting on all of those combinations that are not the 10,000 increments. And so we got deals there because there's a difference between what we'd willing to pay, what we actually paid. So we essentially saved money and got a deal. There's value on that to us.